So we're going to end this week on adding and subtracting fractions with a different kind of activity, an activity that a lot of you aren't going to like, but some of you might love, something a bit different than anything we've done in maths this year. And it's going to help us really get an idea of how well you understand this process of adding and subtracting fractions. Okay, so the thing that you're doing today is putting this process of adding and subtracting fractions into your own words. Okay, you've heard enough of our words. We want to see if you understand it by explaining the process of adding and subtracting yourself. So to be good at this, you'll have to understand each step of your working out. So you'll have to try and remember why we do the things we do, right? We're not mucking around with our fractions just for the sake of it. Every step of our working out has a purpose. So you have to understand the changing of denominators, making mixed and improper fractions, and then just the way adding works. We want to see if you understand what's going on. So can you actually explain each step as it happens? And then can you do pretty drawings? Some of you might be able to, some of you won't. We won't judge you too harshly if you can't. It's just a bonus today if you can. So before we get into the task for today, just a friendly reminder of what maths is involved here. We are adding fractions, they've got different denominators, and you really have to remember that fractions that have different denominators cannot just be added right away, right? You've been given a half, you've been given a third, you can't just put them together and be done. I know you guys just want to write down an answer and be done with the question, but these ones are a bit more complex than that. And the reason is that halves and thirds are different sized pieces and they just don't combine together exactly. Right? In this example here, we've got the same sized strip. Half of that strip is different than a third of that strip. So when I put this third up with this half, it would take me to about here. How much of this bar is filled up? I really don't know off the top of my head because halves and thirds are different. Like I don't know where the answer actually ends up. So you guys are going to have to do some working out today to fix that and then explain how it's done. The steps that you will go through to answer this question, and thankfully for you guys, you only have to do one question today, only answer one fraction. The steps you're going to have to find, you'll have to find a common denominator, so find something that both fractions go into. Um, Last class, I suggested that if you've got things like halves and thirds, then maybe you should be turning them both into sixths, and that's because 2 times 3 equals 6. Okay, that's an easy way of figuring out which denominator you should be working with. Okay, so 6 would be a common denominator I could use if I've got 2s and 3s, halves and thirds. Once we've got that common denominator, we can then make equivalent fractions of the original ones. So turning a half into its equivalent in sixths and a third into its equivalent in sixths, and then we can finally add them together. It's really hard for us teachers sitting at home uh, to fix and catch and correct every different type of mistake that you guys will be making with your fractions because the work's getting harder. There probably are a few mistakes being made. So here's a really common one that might be happening at your houses, then we want to avoid happening. People do get good at finding the common denominator because they say 2 and 3 go into 6, or 2 times 3 is 6. So 6 is my denominator, which means I'm going to be writing an answer that is, in sixths, right? So they put the 6 on the bottom. And then because they know that 2 and 3 make 6, they put the 6 there. Then they just, at the top, they add the 1. 1 half and 1/3 makes 2 sixths. And for those of you that are doing it the right way, you'll realize that this isn't the answer. 2 sixths is a pretty small fraction. It's less than half. 3 sixths would be half. So if I'm adding half and then something else on top of it, I shouldn't be getting an answer that's like less than half of something. So this answer doesn't make any sense. And that's because an important part of the step got skipped over. And we'll look at what that step is now. So what we should be thinking about is how many sixths is a half and how many is a third, right? We've got to change the whole fraction to keep it equivalent, right? 1 half and 1 sixth are different. So we're going to have a different denominator, and to keep it equivalent, we'll have a different numerator up on top as well. So 1 half, if we're doing it like in a fraction wall kind of scenario, 1 half and 3 sixths are the same, right? 3 is half of 6, so 3 sixths is a half. And then 1/3 is the same thing as 2 sixths, right? If I double 3 to make 6 with my denominator, then I have to double the top as well, right? So our new fractions aren't a half and a third. Our new fractions are 3 sixths and 2 sixths. But they're not really new fractions. They're just the same ones we started with, just written differently with a different denominator. So we rewrite it to say that we're adding 3 sixths and 2 sixths. And now we're ready to put them together, and we can just now finally add the tops and get our answer. All right, this is the process you're going to go through today. But in today's lesson, today's activity, to get you guys away from the repetitive process that we're doing in maths, which is really just you're learning something, you're answering questions, and then checking your answers, we're going for a visual representation today of your problem. We're going to be answering one question about one set of fractions. We're going to be doing it in comic book form, though. So I have a sample of this here for you. So first of all, you're going to have a problem to solve. So I have the problem where I've got a quarter plus a tenth. We're going to give you a few problems to choose from. You can choose an easy one like this, or you can choose a harder one if you're up for a challenge. And what you're going to have to do is create a visual kind of storytelling representation of this fraction that explains the steps to someone reading it and would help them learn how to add these fractions together. So here is an example I have. I have my character. She really, really likes adding fractions together, but she's sad, right? Because these fractions have different denominators, right? We can't just add a quarter and a tenth. So what we're doing is we're introducing the character and we're introducing the fraction, right? It's the orientation stage of our story for those of you who are English fans. So what we do then is we're explaining what we're going to be doing, right? Since we can't add a quarter and a tenth, we can make these fractions the same as each other, right? So what you've been taught is maybe you could times 4 and 10 to make 40. What our character is doing is turning the 4s and the 10s into 20, because 4 goes into 20 and 10 goes into 20 as well. Now our character's happy. Okay, but we're explaining what we're doing. We're explaining that we're giving our fractions the same denominator as each other. Okay, so here is our first go at equivalent fractions. We're fixing the quarter to make it into 20ths, and we're showing our working out, right? We've got a nice visual display. My fractions must be equivalent, so I have to multiply the top and the bottom. We're showing that we're timesing the top and the bottom by 5 to make an equivalent fraction out of a quarter, right? 1 quarter and 5/20ths are basically the same thing. We do the same thing again for the tenth. We only have to multiply this one by 2, right? 1/10 is the same as 2/20ths. And now that they have the same size bottom, right, we should use the word denominator, right? We're grown-ups, but in this case, we're talking about bottoms here. This is easy. I'm going to add the numerators, the tops. So now we can go 5/20ths plus 2/20ths. And we have an answer, right? 5/20ths plus 2/20ths is 7/20ths. So essentially what we're asking of you today, you've got to show your working out for your fraction. In all of this, I do have my working out included, right? I wrote my fraction out. I made an equivalent fraction out of the first one and an equivalent fraction out of the second one. I showed what my equivalent fractions are, and then I added them together. But all the way through, we've just got a bit of explanation. So what we're really trying to get today is, do you understand what's going on here? Do you know how to add these fractions together? Can you put that explanation into your own words? And maybe just put a little bit of like illustration or visual flair into it. So a bit of a different task for you today. I'll go over the instructions again, but this is the end result, right? We want a nice little kind of step-by-step kind of comic book or slideshow that takes you through one addition problem from start to finish. So there are a couple of attachments in today's lesson that you can open up and have a look at. The first one are these instructions that'll just give you a brief step-by-step of what we want you to do today. So you only have to do one of these fractions. Okay, so if you want to just do the easiest one that doesn't really involve too much other than adding, that's fine. If that's still where you're at with your maths. The normal one here, the one in the middle, will involve converting from an improper fraction back to a mixed number. And if you're really up for a challenge, this last one has whole numbers, so it's got mixed numbers to be added together. And then if you just add the fraction parts together, there'll be an improper fraction in that, and you'll have to put that back into its mixed number format as well. So you can choose one of these three to do. Okay, you only have to do one of them. And then what you'll be doing is creating a visual comic that is full of instructions, all right? So the instructions are the main part. We want you to explain in your own words what's going on with each step. Okay, so try and choose a character, like have someone doing the explaining. It can be yourself, it could be a talking turtle. Over the years, we've had a whole assortment of inanimate objects or like animals explaining the steps of these comics, the steps of these fractions. So just have a little scribble of a character who can actually look at the camera in your comic and explain what's going on, right? The main thing is though, as you work through your comic, each panel should kind of have a new step of your working out. Right, in my comic, I just kind of introduced the maths and I did one piece of maths as we went, and my character was just putting in her own words how to actually do the maths. We're not testing your creativity. We don't care if it looks pretty or if it looks ugly, right? It's more fun if it is pretty and it's got a bit of color involved. It's probably your almost only chance this year in maths to be a bit creative and put a splash of color in your work. The main thing though is you've got nice, clear, easy to understand instructions for your fraction, and by the time you're finished, you've actually answered the question and got the right answer to what your fraction is. Once you've got your comic all done up, we're going to try and get you to submit it through Google Classroom. So if you've drawn it by hand, which is probably the easiest way to make it, you can take a photo of it and hopefully upload that photo to Google Classroom. Otherwise, if you're using something like PowerPoint or Microsoft Paint, you can save it in whatever file format it is, and you can upload that file to Google Classroom, and we'll be able to open it, no problem. So a bit more advice. So do feel free to draw it by hand. I think that's the quickest and most efficient way to do it, because scribbling out a few characters and stuff, or like trying to use like the draw feature in particular programs is a bit tricky. It's easy to just get your crayons out and just have a little scribble on a piece of paper. Then you can take a picture of that, upload it when it's finished. So also attached to this lesson on Google Classroom, we do have a comic template. It's really just a piece of paper with like empty squares to draw in. You can just use a blank piece of paper though and put your own squares there and fill it in yourself if you want. You could use PowerPoint if you wanted to. Each slide could be a new step. So you just have kind of slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. And as I click through your PowerPoint presentation, your explanations will be there and you'll solve your fraction. Or most computers, they still have the program Paint in there, right? Paint's fun. You just get your mouse, get a little pen, you can draw stuff, right? I drew a smiley face really quickly to show you just how effective it is at creating illustrations. You could make a comic with that. People usually ask if there's a limit on how many panels the comic has to be, because the template has 6 panels in it. It doesn't matter, so you can make it go for 2 pages or 3 pages or 10 pages, whatever, as long as by the time you're finished, you have actually added the fractions together accurately, right? So remember, it doesn't need to be pretty. I'm terrible at art. I can't draw. The example I gave you was really, really ugly, but it was effective because I had 2 fractions and I made them equivalent and I added them together, right? So all we're really judging you on today or looking for is clear instructions that show that you understand how to add fractions, right? You know why you can't just add them at the start. You know what you need to do through each step to actually get the answer. We won't be judging the appearance or the artistic merit. It'd be pretty hypocritical of me, given that I've just made the ugliest comic almost in human existence. So we just want you to kind of set out, panel by panel or slide by slide, a kind of written guide with a visual illustration on how you could explain to someone how to add fractions together, right? It's almost like you guys are the teachers today and you need to explain how to add 2 fractions together. All right, so hopefully you'll have fun with this one and you won't freak out too much about it. Not everybody likes the artistic side of it, but let's have a go and see how it works out.